Alrighty guys, welcome everybody to today's little webinar. So hopefully you guys are all doing well, and we're gonna get started right away. So thank you all for turning up. So I know you guys are very excited to learn about the 20 or 19 techniques to shatter distraction and prime focus and study to get more done in less time. So let me give you guys the context behind this webinar. Today we're mainly going to talk about the importance of study skills, okay? Because at school, oftentimes kids don't really learn study skills. Nobody really gets taught study skills at school. And because we don't get taught study skills at school, okay? Give me a second, guys. Okay, so because we don't get taught study skills in school, what happens is oftentimes kids will find it very difficult to study efficiently, and they will spend countless hours and hours on doing the wrong work. So today I want to go through a whole bunch of techniques that are going to help you no matter if you're going through selective scholarship or even if you're in high school or if you have a child that's younger. It's going to be very helpful because at least you'll know exactly how to use all of these techniques to eliminate distractions. Because oftentimes I think the biggest reason why kids get demotivated is because they'll sit in front of a computer screen, they won't understand, they'll have all this overwhelming amount of work to do, and then it becomes very difficult to get work done. So I'm just gonna wait a little bit longer for everything to go live because I think there are still some parents who are joining us. So I'll just wait a little bit for everyone to come online. Once everyone is on, then we will get started. Okay, so once everyone is on, we will get started. Okay, cool. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the techniques. By the way, we have 185 slides to get through, so it might be a little bit of a longer webinar, but hopefully once you guys get a little preview of these techniques, you'll have a better understanding of how to study. So the 20 techniques include the Pomodoro technique, which is a time management method that breaks work into short intervals, usually 25 minutes each. We have the Pareto principle that we're going to be going through, the 80-20 rule, in which we focus on the most important topics that will yield the most important results. We will be talking about the lowest effective dose, so doing the least amount necessary to achieve the desired outcome. Often kids go a little bit overkill and spend a little bit too much time spread thin, so we're going to be going through what the lowest effective dose is in different subjects. The concept of spaced repetition is also something that we'll talk about, in which we talk about the reviewing of information in increasing intervals so that you retain information. Things like softwares like Anki will really help with this. Active recall, so instead of just rereading notes over and over again or rewatching a video over and over again, testing yourself by actively memorizing and by actively writing down what you remember rather than passively reading is very effective. We're also going to be going through mind mapping, so a graphical way to represent ideas and concepts. This is very useful in certain subjects like English, as well as thinking skills, as well as other high school subjects as well. So mind mapping is very effective. It's also very effective to the very beginning of your essay. So especially when you're stuck, you don't really know what to do, mind mapping is very effective for that. We're gonna go through the Cornell note-taking system, which is essentially when you divide the note page into 3 sections, okay? We're also going to be going through the Feynman learning technique, which is where we explain a concept in simple terms, identifying gaps in explanation, and then refining your understanding. So you basically teach the subject to yourself, you teach it to yourself in a way, and if you don't understand, you feel like you're stuck somewhere, then you go back review. So that's a Feynman technique, we'll go through that. Time boxing, assigning a fixed time to each period of planned activity. Chunking, where you break down information into bite-sized pieces. The Eisenhower box, urgent, important matrix. So what you have to, the urgent, important, not urgent, important, not urgent. Okay, give me a second, guys. I'm gonna move into another room because it seems like there's stuff going on in this room. So I'll just quickly move. Give me a second, guys. And we'll be able to continue the webinar elsewhere. Okie dokie. Okay, sorry guys. So as I was saying earlier, the Eisenhower technique is where you break everything down into urgent, not urgent, important, not important, and go through that process. Another very, very important thing is getting in the flow state, and I'll be going through different ways to get into the flow state. So how to get into the zone so that study doesn't feel like study. Deep work, which is a concept brought by Cal Newport that involves performing high concentration tasks without distraction. So we'll be talking about that as well, how you should set up your schedule and your calendar. So especially those of you who are preparing for different exams, how you can set across a certain time in the morning so that by the time you get home from school, you don't need to do any more work. So we'll talk about deep work as well, how that's very important. Interleave practice, mnemonics, memory aids, that could be visual, auditory, and kinesthetic to remember information. We're going to be talking about dual coding. So this is where you set up notes in a way with simple diagrams and infographics to understand information. So you're not just relying on words. This is very, very powerful. Obviously, meditative techniques we'll go through as well. And then the Zeigarnik technique, which is where you can actually leave tasks uncompleted so that when you come back, you can allow the mind to continue processing the information and actually still get through all the work that you need to get through. So there's quite a lot of different things that we're going to be talking about. Hopefully you guys are super duper excited. And we'll start now with the Pomodoro technique. Now, before I continue, the reason behind my doing of this webinar is also because I've had the same question posed to me many, many times, which is, Stephen, how do I essentially get better? How do I improve my child's time management? So all of this really hinges around time management. It hinges around focus. And so that's what we're going to be working on, obviously, today. The first technique that we'll be going through is the Pomodoro technique. Now, this was developed by Francesco Cirillo, and basically it involves breaking work down into short focus intervals, typically about 25 minutes, followed by a short break. I want all of you guys to write this down. There's something that you can download immediately onto your computer. If you have a Mac or even a PC, if you download what we call the Pomodoro app, okay? It's an app that will basically make a sound that will mark the beginning of the 25-minute timer, and then at the end of 25 minutes, it'll give you a 5-minute break. So there'll be another ringing bell sound, and it'll give you a 5-minute break. The reason why we need to use the Pomodoro app, and the reason why the Pomodoro app works really, really well, is because oftentimes kids will just sit in front of a computer, or they'll sit at a desk, and hours will pass by and they'll have no conception of time. Like, comment down below if you've experienced that with your child, or comment down below that, kids, if you guys have experienced that as well, where time just passes you by and you don't really know time is passing. You don't really know how much time is passing because you're not tracking it. And the other thing is, when you're really overwhelmed by a certain topic, or you're just like kind of like in like what I call like a lull state, where you're kind of like dormant in a way, like you're not fully focused, time can pass by very quickly, and when you lose track of time, you actually end up wasting a lot of it. So the reason why the Pomodoro technique is very, very effective is because within 25 minutes, all you have to do is focus as much as you can within that 25 minutes, and then it automatically sets a break time at the end of 25 minutes, so you have a 5-minute break. By doing that, your focus is at peak state all the time. Okay, if you have these really long study sessions where you're studying for like 2 hours or 3 hours and you're just sitting in front of a computer or sitting in front of a desk and you don't really know what you're doing and you're not really that focused, what tends to happen is your focus drops. If you look at a lot of these scientific graphs around attention and focus, you'll see that attention drops, pretty quickly after about the 31 minute mark. And so that's why the Pomodoro technique is rather effective. Now, the practical application of this is you need to choose a task to do for 25 minutes. You set the time for 25 minutes, but again, you can download a Pomodoro app and this will do it for you. And you work intensely during that 25 minutes without any interruptions. It's very important that you have some kind of time tracking device, because a lot of parents tell me, hey, Steve, my kids study for ages. My kids study a lot. They study 3 hours, 4 hours a day. when in actual fact they might study for 3-4 hours a day, okay, but that doesn't mean that's focused like attention. That doesn't mean that's focused like work. So it's very, very important that we actually have focused work, and this is how we're going to achieve it. The other thing that is rather important is understanding how to utilize the Pomodoro technique in terms of your exams, right? So how many Pomodoros is optimal? How does it differ between kids in year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9? And so that's what we're going to be talking about right now. So this is going to be more specific towards kids who are going for exams like NAPLAN, selective school tests, OC, and scholarships, as well as just various tests that require some kind of time pressure. So the biggest problem is, like I said before, students face the illusion of abundant time. Okay, the illusion of abundant time, where you just think you have a lot of loads and loads of time when you really don't. And then you end up procrastinating, you spend hours in front of the screen. And the problem with this is not only are you wasting time now, when you actually get your exam marks back and the exam marks aren't that savory, you might think to yourself, hey, you know what? I'm not very smart because I study 5 hours a day. And your parents might also think, and parents out there, you guys might also think that your kids aren't, the brightest because they're sitting in front of a computer for 4 or 5 hours a day, mistakenly thinking that they're studying when really, they're just not making the best use of their time. So you might incorrectly label yourselves as lazy or dumb when that's not true. It's just you're very inefficient with the way that you use your time. So here's my recommendation, right? You should align the number of Pomodoro rounds with your academic year. So a child in year 3 should only engage in 3 Pomodoro rounds. So that means 3 rounds of 25 minutes. Okay, I know that sounds like ridiculous. Like, Steven, only 3 rounds of 25 minutes, that's like only an hour and a half. That's not very much at all. But trust me, 25 minutes, if you're a kid in year 3, you're doing 3 rounds of 25 minutes, that's a lot, right? That's a lot. Year 4, 4 rounds of 25 minutes. Year 5, 5 rounds of 25 minutes. And even though these seem very, very modest, they will lead to significant productivity. Because if your attention graph kind of looks like this, if you think about attention and then time, and it basically kind of looks a bit like this, which is kind of what attention looks like. If you cut it off right at the 25-minute mark, your attention is never going to go down here. Whereas if you're doing like 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours at a time, you know what I mean? Then your attention is going to essentially go to 0 or very close to 0, and you won't be able to concentrate. So this is very, very important. And again, simple rule of thumb, just break it down based on your academic year. So I'll give you guys an illustration of what a kid in year 3 might do, okay? Based on like what they might do on Monday. So let's say the first Pomodoro round, you're tackling 30 questions of reading comprehension. So that's the first round. Once that's done, the bell sounds, you take a 5-minute break, you walk around. In the second round, you review, you mark, you correct the reading comprehension questions, and then you add these challenging words to vocabulary.com, okay? Then that should take you another 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. And then in the third round, you dedicate 30 minutes to practicing those difficult words on vocab, okay? At vocab.com, and that's it, right? You've done 3 rounds, you can play for the rest of the day. That is what I would probably, do. So you should make sure that these Pomodoro rounds are also kind of linked to each other. So for example, here, I'm not jumping from subject to subject. I'm focusing on just one cluster of Pomodoros around reading comprehension, okay? And generally it's good to do a cluster of Pomodoro rounds. So for example, there'd be 3 rounds, and then at the end of 3 rounds, you can either go play, or you can take a big extended long break for like 30 minutes to an hour. And then maybe if you want to do some more rounds, you can come back and do it, okay? But this is very, very doable. The whole point of this routine is routines have to be doable, just like diets have to be doable. If you follow a diet and you can only do it for a day, you're not going to lose a lot of weight, nor will you be able to become very, very healthy in a day. But if you can follow a diet or you can follow an exercise regimen for years, that's when the compounding effect stacks up, just like the Pomodoro. So if any parents are wondering, okay, how do I start? I would just start with let's say if your child's in year 3, 2 Pomodoros a day, and just focus your attention on, okay, what are those 2 things going to be? Write them down and then go from there. If you're older, like you're in year 7, you're in year 8, you're in year 9, again, you can use the same strategy, Now, all you got to do is do 7 Pomodoros if you're in year 7, but maybe you want to start with 3 and then work your way up to 4 and then work your way up to 5 and then move on that way, okay? So this targeted study practice is more than sufficient for a day, ensuring students work smart, not hard. When I was in law school at Sydney University, I remember most of the very efficient students who studied law would often use the Pomodoro technique or some inkling of the Pomodoro technique, right? So they might set a 35-minute, 40-minute timer, but everybody would follow this kind of strategy, especially if they were doing very, very well. Okay, second tool to use is the 80-20 Pareto principle. Now, this one is a little bit more difficult to utilize. Okay, it's a bit harder. Still, it's okay. It's not too bad. Okay. Okay, so this one's a little bit more difficult to apply. The only reason being you kind of need to know what to focus on in terms of the 20%. So the Pareto principle basically just means 80% of results come from 20% of efforts. In the study context, it implies that the understanding and focusing on the most important 20% of material could lead to 80% comprehension and 80% improvement. So the way that you would practically apply this is you have to identify what are the core topics, what is the core information that you need that is going to account for 80% of results. Then you allocate time so that you spend more time on those vital 20% topics, ensuring that you understand them deeply, and then you expand outward, okay? So I'm going to give you guys a more practical way of kind of, talking about this and, apply it in more the selective scholarship realm. So let's say you're preparing for a selective or scholarship exam, you are completing reading comprehension. Now, if you're just doing repetitive question solving and you're just doing tons and tons of trial tests, then you're not really conforming to the 80-20 rule because you're just doing everything. The whole point is you want to focus on things, on not everything, but just that 20% of things that will yield the greatest result. What would be more strategic is deep diving into foundational subjects like sociology, psychology, and natural sciences, right? And then pairing this knowledge with techniques like keyword spotting and active recall that elevates, not only elevates comprehension, but improves yields over time, okay? I'll give you guys another example. Let's say, for example, in maths, rather than juggling numerous topics and again, just doing like countless mock tests, it's more effective to zone in on specific themes, areas of personal challenge, like ratios, okay? So one simple way of applying the 80-20 rule, okay, is very simply figuring out, okay, what are my weaknesses? So let's say, for example, you have a 40-question trial test paper, okay? Most of you guys will have like 40-question trial test paper, okay? If I do this entire 40-question trial test paper and I get 80%, then that means I already know how to do 80% of the paper. I don't need to practice that 80% of the paper. What I need to do is figure out what I don't know, okay? So in other words, what you don't know or what your weakness in this trial test paper might be poetry. So what are you gonna do? You will spend 80% of your time now on poetry, okay? Instead of working on nonfiction, because you're already getting full marks in nonfiction, you're already getting full marks in, in fiction, but poetry is a big weakness. So instead of spending an equal amount of time in poetry, nonfiction, everything, it's like everything else goes into the 20%, okay? Because you're already good at it and you spend 80% of time on poetry. Does that make sense? So comment down below, guys, what are you weak at? I know some of you guys are on YouTube right now. Comment down below, what are you currently weak at? You know what I mean? What areas do you need help in? Okay, it might be poetry, it might be, it might be history, it might be scientific passages. What are you weak in? And then think, okay, if I'm going to apply the 80-20 rule, I'm going to spend all my time on the weakest subjects, or at least 80% of my time on the weakest subjects, and not worry about things that I'm already good at, okay? The way that you would apply this in the context of just general preparation or general marks in general is working on your weakest subjects. So for example, let's say you're preparing for an exam and you have English, maths, writing. Let's say you're really, really weak at maths, you're already doing quite well in English and writing, then the goal is not go 33%, but the goal is really to go 80% in one subject. So you might spend 80% of your time in just writing because you're very, very weak at writing. Or you might spend 80% of your time in maths because you're exceptionally weak at maths. But it doesn't make sense to just split it up evenly, okay? You want to find things that have outsized returns. So I'll give you guys a simple example. Simple example is Arnold Schwarzenegger's training regimen. So he recognized that his calves were a weak area, okay? And so what he did was he realized his calves were like the weakest muscle. And so every single day in the morning, he would train his calves. And he would do, I think it was like 700 or 1,000 repetitions of various calf exercises. And what happened in the end was when he went for one of his Mr. Universe competitions, his calves were his best body part. So this is a testament to the idea that strengthening vulnerabilities can be more rewarding than over practicing known strengths. Arnold Schwarzenegger already had like a really, some very well-developed muscles, right? And so in other areas. So it made no sense for him to dedicate an equal amount of attention to everything. It was a lot smarter to work on the weaknesses. So in the context of exam preparation, most of you guys already know what your weaknesses are. 80% of your time rectifying weaknesses, whereas dedicating the remaining 20% to honing your strengths is a good approach. So 80% weaknesses, 20% strengths, something to work on, okay? This also helps. I know a lot of parents might find it very difficult to let go of certain subjects, but the whole point is if you're already somewhat good at something, then you can let go of that and you can work on something else. If you're not good at anything, so let's say for example, you're just really bad at everything. You're really bad at maths, you're really bad at English, you're really bad at writing. Same concept applies. You can't do all three at the same time. If you can't even do one properly, you shouldn't do all three at the same time. So what is a smarter thing to do is, again, go one at a time. Okay, one at a time. And we'll talk about this in more depth later on as well, because it's just super duper important, okay? For those of you who are wondering, how do you find the Pomodoro app? Just go online, type in Pomodoro app, and you'll be able to find it, okay? So don't be scared of letting go of strengths, okay? Because it's always a lot easier to build up a strength than to build up a weakness. So let's say, for example, and most of you guys have experienced this as well, you're very good at English, you let go of English for a little bit, just focus on your weakness of maths. Even if you let go of English, the thing is, even if you let it go for like, let's say a couple of days or a couple of weeks or whatever, when you come back to it, it's very easy to build that back up, right? Just like learning a foreign language, if you've learned it well and it's already your strength and you let it go for a little bit, when you rebuild it, you've already got the brain synapse kind of connections in your brain. So it's fine. You know what I mean? It's very, very easy to retrain and build that back up. So just be aware of that. Okay, next concept, lowest effective dose. So when we talk about lowest effective dose, this is a concept from Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week or 4-hour body, which basically refers to the smallest dose that will produce the desired outcome. It's important to be aware of the lowest effective dose because already as a student in year 5, year 6, or even younger, you have a limited amount of time. So if you had unlimited time, yes, you don't need to worry about the lowest effective dose, but you don't want to be working in overkill, okay? So it's about finding the minimum effective amount to achieve the desired result. Kind of similar to the 80-20 rule, but I'll give you guys a good example of how this applies to, again, the selective scholarship realm. So let's take, for example, maths. The lowest effective dose in maths lies in mastering foundational skills. So if you understand and you practice and to fluency, 2-digit, 3-digit, 4-digit arithmetic operations like subtraction, multiplication, addition, division, until you can execute them within 3 to 4 seconds, and you complement this with a foundational understanding in fractions, decimals, and ratios, you will be basically able to do about 80% of most maths problems, okay? Right? If you just master 2-digit, 3-digit, 4-digit calculations, right? Subtraction, multiplication, addition, division, to the point where you can do it within 3 to 4 seconds, and you complement this with a sort of okay understanding with fractions, decimals, and ratios, you should be able to answer 80% of most maths questions, okay? In a selective exam, in a scholarship exam, and whatever. Most kids don't do this. So what most kids do, or most kids choose to do, is they basically go around and they say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to do tons and tons of practice papers. Or like parents might say, hey, where can I get some more practice papers? And they'll just do tons and tons of word problems. that they, number one, won't understand, and you're practicing with a whole bunch of different topics, and every single time the variable changes, it doesn't work. So again, come back to the lowest effective dose and figure out what the lowest effective dose is in all other subjects. Okay, there's always a lowest effective dose, right? Comment down below if you guys understand what I mean here. Okay, it's super simple to do. It's not very hard. I'll give you guys another example of the lowest effective dose in writing. So in narrative writing, the key is just to incorporate 10 to 20 complex words that enhance character portrayal, 5 senses, and emotions. So those are the only 3 things that you need to worry about. And you only need to find about 10 to 20 complex words that you can constantly reuse. So for example, within characterization, you might want to choose words like eloquent, enigmatic, which just means mysterious, multifaceted. When you're talking about your senses, you might have go-to words that you use, like go-to colors that you always use time and time again. Again, 10 to 20 complex words like pungent, mellifluous, which is something sounding good, tactile, and emotions could just be euphoric, despondent, ambivalent. But once you memorize these 10 to 20 complex words that you use all the time, then your strategy is just to pre-memorize universal settings and have like a recurring character that appears in every single narrative so that you have a ready palette to paint vivid narratives. But it's essentially the same narrative every single time. Does that make sense? This would be the minimum effective dose. It would be super easy to do this, right? Like if I just said, hey, go out and choose 4 words to describe a character, 5 emotions to describe the character, 5 words that have to do with color, 5 words that have to do with sound, 5 words that have to do with touch, and you just take those 20 or 30 words in total and just memorize them. Like how easy would that be? Comment down below, guys. It wouldn't be very hard. And if you just develop the same character, you kind of adapt him to every single narrative piece that you write, you're generally going to be okay. You'll be able to at least get about 70 to 80% of the marks. Okay? This is what I mean by the minimum effective dose. Now, are you going to come first? Probably not. Are you going to come second? Probably not. But again, if you have this as a solid backing, you should be generally okay. You'd be able to do better than like 80% of the kids, the other students who are going for the same exam. So this is rather important. You know what I mean? This is, again, so every single subject has a minimum effective dose. Maths has its minimum effective dose. Writing has its minimum effective dose. Even reading comprehension has its minimum effective dose. It's a little bit harder, but it still has its minimum effective dose of, okay, you should focus on scientific passages because they appear a lot in nonfiction passages, right? It's usually just scientific passages about animals. You might want to read, the BBC's top 5 most important books of all time to get an understanding of general themes. In poetry, you might want to focus more on natural poetry, right? So poems about nature, because they appear a lot, and understand what those themes are. But there's a minimum effective dose. And if you just do that, then again, it becomes a lot easier for you to essentially progress and manage time. So in reading, usually, especially in nonfiction, you're identifying and recognizing structural elements like aims, hypotheses, and findings is pivotal. So just understanding the scientific report has an aim, hypothesis, which is a guess, and then findings, results. And then understanding this kind of framework and scientific texts to decode the content efficiently, because a lot of the nonfiction texts are scientific texts. When it comes to poetry, like I mentioned before, becoming familiar with the major themes. So key themes like landscapes and wildlife, the human condition, exploring emotions and societal issues. So these are all things that constantly reappear in all poems. So again, if you just study natural poetry and you understand the emotional wheel, all the variety of different emotions that can occur in a poem, you're like pretty good. And have a basic understanding of societal issues, you're good, right? That's the minimum effective dose. Okay, and it doesn't take a long time to develop these. Okay, so by focusing on these lowest effective dose strategies, again, students can optimize their preparation, ensuring that they're working smarter, not harder. The next one, spaced repetition. Now, this is something that I want to highlight like in red. This is super duper important, spaced repetition. Most people don't realize the amount of repetitions that you need to be able to memorize something. In order to memorize something, you need it to be repeated a minimum of 20 times, if not more, okay? So spaced repetition is essentially where you have repetition that occurs over and over again, based on the fact that our memory decays over time. So if you've seen the graph around memory decay, like when you learn something once, you will remember it. You have 40% chance of remembering it the next day, and then it just goes down, 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 down until day 7 where it's at 0%. Okay, it's literally at 0% at day 7 because us as humans, we forget something when it's only mentioned once. But spaced repetition is a technique that involves reviewing information at increasing intervals over time so you can strengthen retention. And what we mean by retention is memory. Now, how do you actually apply this? Well, number one, you can start by studying the information. First repetition, review the information the next day. Subsequent repetitions, review it again 2 days, 4 days, a week later. You just want to constantly repeat this. Now, back in the day, when we didn't have technology, you had to, back in my day, you had to open up a textbook, write notes down, and just flip through those pages of notes over and over again. Nowadays, you have a lot of technologies like Anki and Quizlet. So if you just write these two technologies down, Anki and Quizlet, you can automate that process by reminding you when it's time to review specific pieces of information. And so it's very important. Like if you have apps like vocabulary.com, what they will do is when you have a vocabulary list of words that you want to memorize, if you get a word wrong, because it'll quiz you on the words that you don't know, and if you get a word wrong, it'll constantly showcase to you the words that you've gotten wrong. For those of you who are currently in Scholarly, you also know about, you guys also know like what basically goes on within the Scholarly learning platform, okay? In that we have the ability to essentially repeat things through spaced repetition, where kids will be shown the same questions that they've gotten wrong time and time again. Okay, and that's really the only way that you learn. The whole idea of doing questions, throwing them out, doing questions once, throwing them out, or just reviewing it once or twice is not enough. In order to truly learn something, you have to review it like 20 times. When you're learning a word, if you look at it once or twice, you're not going to remember it. But if you review it 20 times, you have a good chance of understanding it, and you have to leverage technology to be able to do that. Okay, so like I mentioned before, on our custom LMS, okay, we have the ability to do this, and I'll show you guys right now what it kind of looks like, so everybody has a little bit more of a better understanding of how this kind of works, because I know right now, some of you guys might be like, okay, we don't really understand how this kind of stuff works, but I'll quickly give you guys a look. And there are a lot of technologies as well that you can utilize to basically make this work. All you got to do is just type in spaced repetition online, and there are tons and tons of apps that you guys can use where you can basically, finish questions, and you can do them over and over again. Okay, so let me quickly open this up. Okay, cool. So I'll quickly just share this with you guys. So there are a couple of different apps that you guys can use. This is the one that we have custom coded for ourselves, and I'll quickly showcase this right now. Okay, so as you guys can see, this is just a trial test that I am attempting, and I can do a practice attempt where I basically just practice it, okay? And then once I've done with my practice session, okay, so if I just click whatever, and I go to next one, mark question, go next one, mark question, go next one, mark question. And once I finish all of these questions, what will basically happen after I finish all of this is whatever questions that I've gotten wrong, they'll appear in a collections tab for me to do later on, okay? So I'll submit that, and then basically what it'll say is it'll say, hey, you know what, do you want to practice it again? Do you have like a results breakdown? And then basically, do you want to practice it again in collections? Okay, so this is where it becomes, again, like just depending on what kind of technology you use, very, very effective, because again, it utilizes the whole concept of repetition. Okay, very, very important. Anyway, let's move on. The other place we can do this is vocabulary.com. So when you stumble upon certain words, the system will queue these terms for future sessions, ensuring learners get ample opportunity to practice and internalize them. There's another website called activerecall.com, which is also very, very useful, that also facilitates spaced repetition methodology, enabling users to focus on topics that they find challenging and revisiting them at spaced intervals. So you got to put the information in, but this is important. So for parents who are doing just countless papers, and for all actually tutoring colleges, to be honest, that don't have any kind of spaced repetition application, it's just a complete waste of time. A physical vocab list is a complete waste of time because it just takes too much effort to pull up, like, you know, a sheet of paper and, you know, cross and do all that kind of stuff. So just use apps. That's why all physical tutoring colleges are basically a waste of time, in terms of, if you just go through a question once and then you never see it again, you're not learning anything. You know what I mean? Pretty obvious. I don't know why people don't question it. But same thing occurs, right? Every single time. Like if you watch, like a teacher teach you something once and you can't watch the recording of the class, you're not gonna know what the teacher taught you, especially if your child's really, really young, unless they have constant repetition. So that's why these things are incredibly, incredibly important, okay? And doing countless papers is a waste of time if all you're doing is you're just chucking it in the red bin, right? You're not recycling that information. So to fully harness the benefits of spaced repetition, it's essential to utilize these tools and platforms to integrate this method into core functionality. Okay, cool. Next one that we're gonna go through. Hopefully this is useful. Comment down below, guys, if this is useful. We have a lot to get through, by the way, like so much to get through today. Next tool that we need to use is active recall. So active recall is where the process of actively stimulating memory recall during the learning process. So instead of just passively rereading things over and over again, you're actually testing yourself and you're trying to pull information from your memory without looking at the source. So the easiest way for me to describe this is what I call the cover-up method. So most of you guys would have experienced this at some point in time where you use a cover-up method. Some of you guys maybe not, where you memorize a bit of vocab, you cover it up, and then you test yourself. Okay, that's the way that we did that in the olden days. Very, very important that we use active recall. So many kids, what they do is they just turn up to class, they don't take any notes, and they don't try to memorize anything, or they reread notes, or like, you know, like a book over and over again, okay? It's the biggest waste of time I've ever seen, right? When kids are like, especially kids, I'm pretty sure none of the scholar kids do this, but when you get given a vocab list, if you're just staring at that vocab list, and you're just reading those words over and over again, trying to get it in your brain, it's the biggest waste of time, because it's just never going to get in your brain because you're reading it again passively. This is also the problem that I have with, you know, various parents who tell me that the kids read a lot and why they're not improving when they read a lot. It's because, you know, you're just passively reading. You know what I mean? It's like if I watch exercise videos all day long and I don't exercise, am I going to lose weight? Probably not. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. So why do you expect yourself to get smarter or like build more vocab just by reading? It doesn't make any sense. So let's say, for example, you're studying biology. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you guys aren't studying biology, but let's just say you are. You have a text on cellular respiration and you read it close in detail, okay? You read it very, very closely. Then what you do is you close the book, okay? And then what you try to do is you try to write as many notes down as you can after you've covered it up. You can't see it anymore. You try to write down as much as you can, okay? You can draw it out. You can scribble down notes. You can do any of this. But that is a way that you learn, because then you'll be like, okay, wait a second, I don't really remember that. Okay, wait, like I don't really remember that little bit about the nucleus. Okay, I don't know about the nucleus. Then you go back, you open up your book, and then you're like, aha, now I know about the nucleus. You write down, okay, nucleus is, okay, what within the cell. And then you go through that process over and over again, because now you can figure out what you don't know. Okay, you can actually test what you don't know. It's not just, you know, you have it in front of you all the time and you can't really test what you don't know. So this is where you can, like, comment down below if you've had that mind blank moment where you're like testing yourself in vocab and you don't really know what a word means. Okay, cool. Then you can actually go back and figure out what the word means. But if you're just staring at a page, you're just staring at a vocab like sheet, like you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to remember anything because it's just right in front of you. You're not testing yourself. So when you actually go into the real exam and the real test, and then you get like 0 out of, you know, whatever, or you keep on getting those mistakes wrong, you're like, oh, I keep on getting it wrong. It's because you didn't test yourself earlier. That's why. So it's very important to figure out what you don't know so you can refer back to your notes and see what you missed or you got wrong. So active recall is a very dynamic study technique. Again, you can use the website activerecall.com to do a lot of this, or you can just use a simple cover-up technique. Okay, it's been proven to enhance retention and deepen understanding, and contrasts starkly with traditional methods such as rereading. So anybody who's just doing rereading it's just a big waste of time, highly inefficient. And anybody who tells you just to reread over and over again or just take notes, even the whole concept of reading and taking notes is a waste of time because you're not testing your memory. Okay, the only way that you can really test your memory is when you cover up something and then write notes on what you remember. Until that, don't write notes. There's no point. Okay, so so many people just default to rereading as a go-to study method, believing that repetition leads to comprehension, and it doesn't. Okay, rereading information over and over again is a terribly inefficient way to memorize content. It is passive, often leading to the illusion of understanding without fostering genuine comprehension. Okay, instead of falling into the trap of rereading, engage in active study methods, scribble notes, annotate text, and use the cover-up technique. Okay, that's very important. The other technique that I like to use, this is very important, and I'm actually going to start implementing this in the scholarly classes soon, is what I call the 5-minute speed rewrite. 5-minute speed write. So basically at the end of a class, let's say you've got into the end of a scholarly class or you've got into the end of a lecture, trying to write down as much as you can in 5 minutes, okay, of what you remember from the class is going to be like very good, because after studying, if you just invest 5 minutes to write down everything that is freshly imprinted in your mind, that is going to pressure your brain to extract the core details actively. Now, the beautiful thing about like doing this in a recorded, like a class that is obviously live, but recorded later for use, which is what we have at Scholarly, is if you don't know something, like if you have a moment where you're like, oh, I don't really know, like you're writing, oh, I don't really remember what Steve said, you can go back and you can watch the video, right? The problem that I often have with physical centers, and lots of parents don't talk about this, is the amount of information that you actually retain from a physical center, especially if it's not recorded. If the video is not recorded, if there's no recording of the classroom, what actually happened in the classroom, and your child's like, oh, I don't really remember what I learned in class today, there's nothing to go back to, right? And if there's nothing to go back to, then there's nothing to remember, because your child's not going to remember anything anyway. And so all you're doing is just a bunch of questions. You haven't remembered anything, you know what I mean? Because even if you're doing the 5-minute speed write of your memory and you're like, oh, I don't really remember what happened, you don't really have anything to go off. So it's rather important to have like some semblance of a recording or something to go back to, right? So that you can remember better and so that you have something to compare to. So post speed write, you always want to contrast your fast notes with the original content. Spotting discrepancies will highlight areas that need revisiting. This is also my problem with most schools in general. So if you go to class for 6 hours a day and none of it's recorded, then what did you learn? You know what I mean? Because the problem is you're relying on maybe the notes that you took in class, but let's say you didn't take any notes in class, then you have nothing to go off. And so it's just a lot more efficient to, number one, have a recording that you can rewind, go back on, and use that as a way to check with your 5-minute speed write. Okay, so that's just something to be aware of. We're not sure if parents are aware of that, but yes, most of the scholarly kids would probably understand that. Okay, let's move on. So, reading comprehension. Like I said, when engaging with reading comprehension, think of each passage not as just a one-time read, but a reservoir of knowledge that can be revisited. So instead of treating reading comprehension, which often I think a lot of kids treat as just something that they need to do, and you treat this content as just disposable. Like every single time you read a passage in reading comprehension, you just forget it. Instead of doing that, envisage it as recyclable knowledge that you can use for future exercises, understanding related topics, and things like that. And comment down below, guys, if you've experienced that. Sometimes when you go through a passage that you've seen before, like global warming, you already kind of know, you have a general knowledge base already of reading comprehension. So you understand what the topic is basically going to be about. And so it's a lot easier for you to read through that due to the reservoir of knowledge that you've created for yourself based on previous reading comprehension passages. So this is very, very important, okay? Major keywords, again, get an activerecall.com account, get an Anki account, and start building your knowledge base. Same thing with maths. It's very important to use the cover-up technique to explain or solve a maths problem without referring to the method or solution. Okie dokie. So let's move on to the next bit. Cornell note-taking system. So the Cornell note-taking system, so Cornell note-taking system is a very important note-taking system in that it helps you essentially divide your page into 3 parts. 3 sections are basically cues, notes, and summary, okay? And so it's really designed to extract the maximum amount of information from lectures and reading. So if you just type in the Cornell note-taking template, you'll basically understand how to break down the page. So let me quickly show you guys what it kind of looks like. And again, you can use it in your daily exercise to break down notes. So essentially you have your cue questions, which we'll talk about in a second, that will really trigger your memory. You got your main notes and your key thoughts, and then you have your summary at the very, very end, okay? And you use all of these in conjunction to essentially help you read. So here we have the notes section that you have on the right-hand side. You have the cues section, which is where you jot down key terms, questions, or prompts related to the notes. And then at the very bottom, you have like a little summary of the main ideas, okay? Now, why is the Cornell method very, very important? Because it can help you remember information very quickly. So again, all we're doing here is we're distilling information through cues or anchors. And by doing that, we can also learn and memorize very, very important words. So oftentimes when you have very important words, most kids forget. If you use Cornell method, you'll be fine, and I'll explain what that is right now. So give me a second. Let's say, for example, you have the word defibrillators, okay? So let's say you have the word defibrillators and you're trying to memorize the word defibrillators. So a defibrillator is basically a device that revives the heart. Okay, so when your heart stops, when you stop breathing, your heart stops. Defibrillator will essentially, re-energize or reactivate your heart so that it starts beating again. So as a cue, so what you would put in the cue section or the keyword section here is you would put something like defy, which basically means to resist challenge, brr, which basically resembles the sound of an electrical charge, and then later, which indicates that the heart is resuming its function after the pause. So defy, to resist, brr, the electrical charge, later, heart resuming its function. And so if you write these cues, these mental cues down, it can really help you memorize the definition for defibrillator. Okay, so you think of an electrical surge defying a still heart, causing it to brr back to life later. And that's how you would basically visualize it. So it's very important to have these kind of cues, these memory cues, to help you memorize stuff. Okay, very, very important. We usually do this automatically. Like I'll do this automatically with a lot of the vocab stuff. Most of you guys who are already in Scholarly, but for those of you guys who are not, this is important to do. Okay, let's say, for example, you have something like the bandwagon fallacy. Again, coming up with a weird and wacky image is very powerful. So your cue could be, let's say you're trying to memorize bandwagon fallacy. Most of you guys already know what it is. It's a logical misstep of asserting a belief that is valid simply because it's widely accepted. So saying something like, hey, you know what? I think that Scholarly is the best because everybody else around me says Scholarly is the best, right? It's a fallacy. That's a bandwagon fallacy. So the way that you would construct the cue would be, let's say, for example, you imagine a band, a group of people producing music on a wagon, like a Toyota Camry. So imagine like a band of people performing music on a Toyota Camry. And your visualization here would be you envision a band joyfully playing tunes on a Toyota Camry, luring more and more people to join in, essentially jumping on the bandwagon. So eventually you have millions and millions of people who are all like playing instruments or joining the band on the Toyota Camry. And as the music becomes more infectious, masses are drawn to this moving bandwagon, playing tunes that signify popular yet potentially misguided beliefs. And so in the end, everybody collapses because obviously there's too many people on the Toyota Camry. Does that make sense? That's an example of a cue that can help you remember the bandwagon fallacy. So the whole point of the Cornell, like, comment down below if you guys get that. Comment down below, guys, if you understand that cue, okay? And you understand how it helps you memorize things. Yes or no? Like, yeah, most of you guys would get that, right? The reason why you want to construct a queue and not just have notes is because notes by themselves are useless, okay? You can't memorize them. But if you have cues, you have keywords, you have things on the left-hand side that help you remember, like anchors in memory, that is really going to get you to the next level. That is really going to be what defines and separates you from other people, because you'll just now, like every single time you think of bandwagon, you think of a band on a Camry and then, you know, falling off makes sense. Okay, next one that we're going to go through. Cool. Next one that we're going to go through is the Feynman technique. So this is developed by a guy called Richard Feynman, and this method involves teaching a concept in simple terms. So the idea is, if you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it well enough. Now, the physical application of this, the practical application of this is quite simple. So number one, you can teach it to a toddler. So if you have like a little brother or little sister, you can try teaching it to your little brother or little sister, or you could try teaching it to a friend. This usually helps, and it really pushes you to simplify and distill information. So most of the kids at Scholarly, you guys are friends within Scholarly, or, you know, if you have friends at school, you might want to try to teach it to them. Okay, so when you learn something new, like let's say something in thinking skills, you might want to share it the next day with your friends. If your friends are looking like you, they don't know what you're talking about, then it probably means that you don't understand it very well. Okay, but if they do understand it, it means that you understand it very well. Now, you can do that, or the modern approach, which is a smart approach, is you can actually use AI. So you can use AI bots, AI chatbots to basically, explain concepts to them, and then ask them if they understand what you have said. So there are AI chatbots like Replika, so Replika. Again, parents, obviously do your research before letting your kids play with these AI chatbots, you know what I mean? Because some of them can be a little bit dangerous, you know what I mean, right? So obviously do your research before you let your child play or, like, you know, talk to an AI chatbot. Okay, but for the most part, most of them, if they're controlled by GPT, they're all right. But using that as a way to, like, again, see how much you have memorized is powerful. And if no one's around, just speaking to an inanimate object like a wall, or even to yourself, but it really helps verbalize your understanding and helps you solidify it. So what I used to do when I would try to find, if I was learning something very, very complex, I didn't know how to do a question, I would try to explain to myself once I figured out how to do it. And from there, I'd test myself if, hey, does that actually make sense? And if it didn't, I'd ask myself why it didn't. Okay, so that's the way that you do that. Okay, if you identify stumbling blocks, if you identify gaps where you can't clearly articulate or give a clear answer, these are your knowledge gaps, right? So when you hit a mental block, you realize it's too complicated, that's a sign that you need to revisit the topic. So let's say you're talking about cellular respiration, you get to a certain point where you don't know what you're talking about, then you're like, okay, I don't know. Now that's where you want to be. You always want to identify what you don't know and then go back and then do some more research search around that. The faster you find the gaps, the more gains or the more mental gains you're going to make. Okay, so identifying gaps is very, very important. You return back to source material, you dive back into your notes, and then you aim for clarity. Okay, review, refine. Okay, cool. So Feynman technique is good. Time boxing. Now, let me see. There's 185 slides here, so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get through. I think we're like halfway. But yeah, let's move on. Time boxing. So time boxing involves allocating a specific chunk of time or a box for a particular task or activity. So by setting a strict start and end time for tasks, you can stay focused. Now, the way that I would use a time box is I would pre-plan your day the day before. So every night, you draft up a schedule for the following day, okay? Then what you do is you decide on the Pomodoro-based time blocks. So you might say, hey, tomorrow I'm just gonna do 5 time blocks from 4:30 until like 8 o'clock, okay? That might be your thing. So from 4:30 to 8 o'clock, I'm just gonna do 5. So if you're in year 5, you just do 5 cycles. And then what you do is you list out exactly what you're gonna do for each one of those cycles, okay? So you list out, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 1, I'm gonna complete the trial test. Number 2, I'm gonna do this. Number 3, I'm gonna do this. Number 4, I'm gonna do this. And you wanna always prioritize those tasks based on urgency. Then you want to visualize each Pomodoro cycle as a life or a respawn in a video game. So if you don't have to complete the task in one cycle. You have multiple respawns to basically come back and conquer it. So hearing the Pomodoro bell sound is really the signal of the end of the cycle, and it's your brain's cue to like rest and reset. It's kind of like a boxer, right? You're doing like 8 rounds or 5 rounds, and you can really prevent yourself from burnout and overwhelm. So yes, so that's what I'd do, and I'd write out tomorrow, hey, I'm gonna do 5 Pomodoros. The next time I'd do 4 Pomodoros, and what those 4 or 5 Pomodoros are going to be, okay? Now, the other thing that I would recommend is chunking, okay? Chunking means basically breaking down information to smaller and more manageable bits or chunks. This idea is based on the notion that our short-term memory can typically hold 7 plus minus 2 items. So grouping items makes them very, very easy to remember. Now, one thing that I want to mention is oftentimes when people say, right, when people say that, oh, look, I'm so overwhelmed. You're only overwhelmed because you're trying to do too many different things at the same time, right? But if you just take it one step at a time, or you just really divide it and you make these chunks smaller and smaller and smaller, then it becomes a lot easier to swallow. I'll give you guys a good example. So let's say, for example, if I want to say that I want to swallow a loaf of bread, right? I got a loaf of bread, I want to swallow it in one bite. It's not happening. But if I just take little bits and pieces and I just start eating out those little bits and pieces, it might take me like, if I just had like a little bit and piece, like it might take me 2 hours to finish the loaf of bread. It might take me a day to finish the loaf of bread. But if the chunks are small enough, then I can do it. If two slices of bread is too big, then we go like 1 slice of bread. If 1 slice of bread is too big, we break it down to like half a slice of bread. If half a slice is too big, we go to a quarter, we make it smaller and smaller and smaller until we can eat it, okay? So we keep on breaking down the chunk, smaller and smaller until you can eat it, okay? Break down the chunk smaller and smaller until you can eat it. That is a way that you can basically like do anything you want. And that's also the way that you can like avoid being overwhelmed. Because oftentimes when people are overwhelmed, it's just because they're trying to do too many different things at once, okay? Right? Trying to do too many different things at once. Okay, cool. So overestimation, most people underestimate what they can do in 10 years, overestimate what they can do in 1 year. So again, for anybody who's overestimated like what they can do, like, you know, just focus on 2 things, right? Or 1 thing, or like half a thing. A good analogy is perfecting a musical piece with 10 notes might seem very daunting, but if you can play 2 notes swiftly, then you can play 3 notes swiftly, then you play 4 notes swiftly, and you just start building up one by one, okay? That's what I would do. Same thing in vocabulary memorization. Now, it seems like we're not going to be able to get through the rest of this information because there's quite a lot of information, and I know it's already 9 p.m. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to leave this for another day, okay? So I'll keep these kind of slides. I know it's already 9 o'clock, so it's rather late. So I'll keep these slides for another day, and we'll do a part 2 of the 10x study skills, okay? Anyway, hopefully you guys found this useful. To a lot of parents who are wondering, hey, you know, Steve, how do we get involved in Scully? There is a waitlist that'll go up soon. So if you have a child in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9, and you want to get some coaching for them, you want them to learn how to study efficiently, effectively, without too much stress and without doing the wrong things, then we're the place to be. You know what I mean? So there'll be a little wait list. You can fill it out. But for the rest of you guys, I'll do a part 2 of the 10x study skills. We'll go through the remaining slides because there's a lot of information, and hopefully you guys have found the information given so far useful. Anyway, that's it from me. Thanks, guys, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon. By the way, I know a lot of you guys are wondering about our selective results. We've done exceptionally well. Out of the 150 or so people who've already replied, we have over 50 kids who've already got in the top 10% across English, maths, as well as thinking skills. And so we've had some pretty crazy results. We're still working on the James Threws count, the North Sydney Boys count, the Balcombe Hills count, but that seems pretty crazy as well. But our results have really kind of blown me away. But we'll talk more about that on Monday. So we have a big webinar on Monday. So if you're in Scully, come, join the webinar on Monday. think it's Monday 7 p.m. I think it's Monday 8 p.m. as well, in which we'll be talking about the results. We'll be talking about the wait list and all that kind of stuff, as well as the reserve lists and how that's going to be solved, and some interesting things that we've noticed about the bands, as well as results where some kids who are non-OC ended up getting in James throughs, right? So we talk about all of those different stories as well on Monday. Anyway, thanks guys. Have a good Friday night. Hopefully that was helpful, and I'll see you